It's April 2016. Coronavirus still hasn't been invented in a secret underground lab by current President Barack Obama and Bill Windows. Kobe Bryant is in the news because he just retired after 20 years in the NBA, and although a few high-profile celebrities with clean rap sheets have passed away recently, you feel content with the way the world is. On the 26th of the month, you get a bowl of Fruit Loops and a big, hoppy beer and kick back on the couch to finally figure out how Jon Snow isn't dead because there's no way he's actually gone. The thought doesn't even cross your mind that one day, this show will end. Deeper in your mind is the idea that this show will actually end tragically, but not like Shakespeare tragedy. I'm talking Titanic kind of tragedy, and not the movie by Jimmy Cam. More like The Boat, inspired by the movie. Howdy. Welcome. Welcome to my humble abode. Few notes before I get started. My beard looks bad because I didn't expect to record today. Because I had already recorded this video, I noticed that in my last video, my glasses created a glare for the laptop the whole time, and it made it very obvious that I was reading off a script the whole time. I don't know why that really matters, but that's part of the reason I'm re-recording this. And I'm also doing it without my glasses on or contacts in, so I'm just going to be blind the whole time. And my prescription is different in each eye, so if you see my left eyebrow going up a lot more, I apologize for however this video turns out. If it turns out well, I'm still going to apologize for it. Also, you'll notice I'm using a mic this time because the audio has been atrocious every other time I have done this. So we're just trying a lot of new things. If the audio doesn't work, that's going to suck because I'm just going to use the shotgun audio that I have on my camera because I'm not re-recording this for a third time. So I didn't like the Game of Thrones finale. I know, that's a really hot, spicy, it's up there on the Scoville charts. It's got that, what's the spicy chemical? Spicy chemical. It's got the capsaicin, that take. It's very spicy. It's hot, is what I'm saying. Now that the dust has settled, and showrunners Dan Weiss and David Benioff have been criticized thousands of times, rightfully so, for completely bombing what was one of the greatest fantasy series to ever air, I wanted to address something that's been rattling around my brain since I first started watching Game of Thrones. Its reputation. I really hope this audio turns out well because it's very uncomfortable to hold a microphone the whole time, and if it turns out it wasn't for anything, so be it. Also, I want to address the fact that I'm wearing a beanie in this episode. It's just a new thing that I thought I'd try for this one. I'm also not at all in a good place in the shot, so I'm going to move over now. That might have put me out of focus, and we're back to square one, baby. I remember before ever watching a single episode of Game of Thrones, my mom asked if I wanted to watch the show with her, and I kind of just dismissed her jokingly and was like, I don't think Game of Thrones is a show that you watch with your mom. And I ended up watching it on my own months later. And it really isn't that risque of a show. I mean, I've seen worse, but still the reputation that preceded it was boobs and violence. That was pretty much all I knew about Game of Thrones. Those two things, and that main characters die, and it surprises you, but they always tell you that, and then the main character you expected to die ends up dying anyway. So, do main characters die? Sure. Is it unexpected? No, just no. Anyway, beyond that, the reputation didn't really exist, at least not in my circle of friends, which were relatively casual viewers of most media. And holy crap, I look so tired, too. I'm so not used to not having glasses in front of my eyes. I don't know if that makes them look better or worse or what, but I look dead inside. And it's weird, I had like more energy today than I have in a while. Probably because I slept 12 hours last night, dude. Oh, things are weird right now. Anyway, back to the reason I'm making a video. So when I finally started the show, beginning like as season 4 was wrapping up, obviously starting from the beginning, I was shocked to find that it wasn't nearly as edgy as I had been led on to believe. Furthermore, the show was naturally evolving at this time because it was running out of source material to adapt. And whether or not the first 4-ish seasons were a good adaptation isn't really what I want to talk about in this video. If you disagree that the first 4 seasons were a good adaptation, just suspend that for a little bit while we get into this, because the rest of the video is going to largely hinge on that opinion. Have you tried to get anyone into Game of Thrones now? Or has anyone started watching Game of Thrones after the finale and you just want to tell them no? I know a guy who is beginning the series, and I don't think he's much of a fiction reader, so I can't tell him, no, just read the books. But I feel bad for people who are just now starting the series. Game of Thrones always existed, as well as A Song of Ice and Fire. They existed as a means to a tragic end. Each step in the journey that we witness is meant to remind us that this isn't a fairy tale as we know it. People die, innocents are eviscerated, bad guys tend to win and continue winning, even when most people think that they've failed. But at some point in its run, some point meaning toward the end of the 5th season, mostly through the 6th season, Game of Thrones ceased to be that kind of story. It was at that point that Game of Thrones stopped being a story at all. It became a television show. Television is far different from any other kind of media. Duh. Generally, in a serialized season of television, each episode contains its own 3 or 4 act structure to its plot. That also plays into the season as a whole, which also tends to mimic a 3 or 4 act structure. A perfect example of this in the fantasy genre is Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. If you haven't watched Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, you need to watch it right now. It'll scratch that itch for Game of Thrones, I promise you. And also the itch for Sesame Street. Sometimes instead of that 3 or 4 act structure going over the season, it goes over the series as a whole. A couple great examples of this would be Avatar: The Last Airbender or Breaking Bad, 2 shows that have nothing to do with each other, and I just compared them. It's going to be a weird video. You can contrast this with movies that exist in a franchise, things like obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The whole plot structure of the entire franchise, it's divided into phases, but those phases don't represent any sort of act structure in any way. Each movie focuses itself on that kind of structure. The whole series, though, is just kind of all over the place, which is fine. It works for it. Movies that do structure themselves as this sort of 3-act structure thing that I'm talking about don't work out very well. Take Alita Battle Angel, for instance. I really liked it. It was a really visually interesting movie, well acted, great special effects. I didn't get bored at any point through it, but really the narrative was just the first act of a larger one. But with television, each episode contains an entire story, generally, and Game of Thrones isn't a great example of this type of structure because of its split perspectives, or at least in the first 4 seasons it's not. But within each season, there are definitely mini arcs that characters and plot lines go through that kind of illustrate this 3 or 4 act plot structure, depending on who you ask. But come season 5, things started to morph. Each episode was structured around an event or a narrative. Not the outliers like Battle of the Bastards, which was obviously kind of its own special episode. They were definitely different from the norm. But each episode chose a main character to focus on while cutting to other perspectives in order to build suspense. And here lies the problem. Remember earlier how I said that my casual viewer friends thought the show was about boobs and blood? Well, they really liked mid-series Game of Thrones. I'll admit, when watching the first 4 seasons, you have to kind of view them as books or a more written structure due to the different structure that Martin put into the books that were being adapted. But that combined with the desire to create a faithful adaptation to the written material, it ends up with this sort of pseudo-narrative that doesn't really present any structure, because that's the point of Game of Thrones. Martin never set out to make Lord of the Rings 2 or Wheel of Time the squeakquel. He wanted to create a new type of fantasy where anything can and will happen. There aren't heroes or villains, at least not functionally in the narrative. There's only characters that we view as morally upstanding, who are often even punished for being so. Is Jon Snow the hero of Game of Thrones? No. Is Daenerys? Absolutely not. But in season 5, they suddenly just were. And people loved it, or at least we thought we did at the time. In the books, as characters are whittled down to the bare-bones cast that we see in the show, Martin adds new players and allies, villains and schemers. The show couldn't do that because it was a television show, and you can't just introduce late-game players. You end up with characters like Euron Greyjoy. Suddenly there needed to be a clear protagonist, so Dan and Dave took the two characters that had the most clout and recognizability as well as the most morally approachable goals and turned them into the generic heroes of the story. And they did it based on their own ideas, sure, but what we wanted as fans definitely contributed to their construction of these two characters as protagonists. Jon and Daenerys were the show at this point. They didn't bother refreshing old characters or keeping subplots going, but we just kind of played along. In Battle of the Bastards, while a visually stunning episode, it damned the entire series because for the first time in the entire run, we had good versus evil. The Battle of Blackwater was Stannis, a morally ambiguous character with good and bad people on his side, against the Lannisters, a collection of people of varying morality with good and bad people on their side. The Red Wedding was the closest we get to good versus evil in the prior part of the series, but it wasn't really versus, it was just kind of a massacre one-sided. And I'd argue that these things weren't absolutely about moral ambiguity. I don't think the first and only reason that Martin wrote these scenes or these battles was in order to address the fact that war isn't always simple or anything like that. Or at least I don't think that he intentionally meant for that to be the only thing that we get out of it. See, Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire are about power at their hearts. There's no reason to argue that point. I think we all kind of can come to that conclusion on our own pretty simply. It's not about the corruption of power, only about what people are willing to do to attain it. And sometimes that even means they become better people. It shows that certain people are willing to break the harmful status quo in order to help others, while others are willing to fight the death for that status quo in order to keep their power. That's something that I think we can relate to in our own world. Isn't that crazy? Fantasy sometimes translates into reality. Wild. But the idea is that there's no clear-cut definition of a power struggle in this world. But again, the source material ran out, so they started having to write a television show, and they had to make things clearer. Ramsay Bolton didn't do a single thing that anyone in their right mind would defend. Same with Euron Greyjoy, one of the most blasphemous character adaptations ever. Everyone loves to love on Jaime's character arc, but they tend to forget about Cersei's fall. It's meant to directly contradict and foil Jaime's rise. Look at what we witness of Cersei from the beginning. She's in a horribly abusive relationship with the king, to put it very lightly. She's just waiting for her son to become the king so she no longer has to deal with Robert, who, by the way, if you think Robert is a good guy, you are looking at the story very wrong. Her actions that lead to killing the king are kind of excusable. Is murder okay? No, I don't defend it. But does Cersei have a better reason than some people to murder her husband? I'm not gonna say yes or no, but I'm gonna nod my head. She fights to keep her family safe first and foremost, specifically her sons and daughter. So when Ned Stark, a noble man, threatens her family's reputation, she lashes out at him. And here's where I'm probably going to lose some people, because I'm going to say something that doesn't sound okay, but let me explain real quick. Let me get into the point of what I'm trying to say. Why does it matter that Cersei's children are Jaime's? Yes, I know that pretty much their introduction to us is them having sex and pushing a child out a window, attempting to murder him. But really, what does it matter that their children are born of incest? Ooh, man. Those words felt wrong coming out. But let me explain. In this world, incest isn't uncommon, even if it is reviled by most people. In fact, in Cersei's case, the real sin was giving birth out of wedlock. The father doesn't matter nearly as much because she knows that if Robert finds out that those aren't his children, he will kill them. So it doesn't matter who the father is. It just matters that he isn't Robert. So when Ned is put to the stone, he rescinds what he initially accused the family of doing, and Cersei is willing to let him live. Because she knows what will come of it if he is killed. She knows the repercussions. She's been alive long enough and seen these wars. She understands that killing the head of one of the great houses is a bad idea. Her defining goal is to protect her family like a lioness. And guys, if you haven't watched the show or read the books, read the books actually. Don't go back and watch the show. But read the books and just picture each of the characters as the animal that their house represents. That's hard to do with the Boltons. I don't know how you picture them as flayed men, but just picture them as that, and you'll realize that George R.R. Martin wasn't going too deep with his metaphors and his symbolism. Anyway, so Cersei is a lioness protecting her family, but Joffrey doesn't call for a stay of execution. He ends up going through with it. Now the Starks aren't just out to get her. Everyone is. Another fun thing to do in seasons 2 and 3 is to watch Cersei and Joffrey's relationship. They grow really, really slowly more distant, and they aren't as touchy-feely anymore. And Cersei begins separating her children because she knows that Joffrey is a monster and will likely suffer for what he's done. So what am I getting at here talking about Cersei? Well, in season 5, episode 10, Cersei breaks and stays broken, and she doesn't do much of anything else. After her walk of shame, she stops caring about her children, just kind of in general. Well, she stops caring about her child. There's only one left at that point. And in season 6, she stops caring altogether. Because at that point, she had to be, quote, evil. And that's it. There's no ambiguity to her. There's no reasoning behind what she does. At this point, she's just evil. So the showrunners broke her down until she was just completely damaged, and they just left her there. It was boring, and we all know that. We all saw Cersei in the last couple seasons. She just kind of stood there sipping wine and looking out over King's Landing. Villains don't become villains just because of revenge in good literature. It isn't just, you wronged me, I will get you back. That's just lazy. It's not a relatable goal to anyone, really, especially not to the extent that Cersei does it. But fans wanted that. Because of the growing audience that Game of Thrones had, suddenly people all over the place were watching it. People who weren't even fantasy fans, they were enjoying this show because of the fact that it was separating itself from the source material and we wanted more. They had to start giving us clear-cut images of an evil person. They wanted a morally interesting character with a clearly defined goal to lose both of those aspects about her character in order to find someone that audiences can just hate. I don't want to sound like the show, like I'm saying the show got bad because it went mainstream. I'm saying it got bad when it went mainstream. Did fans ruin Game of Thrones? Fans created a reputation for the show of moral ambiguity and surprising consequences for actions. But as the audience grew, the writers knew they needed to please everyone once the books ran out. And it worked. And it would have continued working until eternity. Shows like this could go on forever, but they don't wrap up well. You see, Daenerys is destined to become the Mad Queen. And the showrunners knew this and decided not to use foreshadowing or planning or good writing in general to show this. They just had to get her a little PO'd when she thought for a second. Daenerys had to remain morally consistent and upstanding right up until the moment she wasn't. And Daenerys' development was consistent through the series up until about season 5 or 6. She was a naive girl who didn't understand the world, and when given power, her naivete caused bad things to happen to her for being idealistic. Then she started listening to her advisors and learned the world isn't so black and white. She'd have to make some tough decisions for herself and stand behind them. The Sons of the Harpy plotline was a brilliant idea to introduce. Daenerys is finally having to answer for all of the things that she has done kind of blindly, and she's not suffering for it. The people she cares about and the people she freed, those are the people who are suffering for it. It's actually a genius idea for a new kind of plotline for her. But it just kind of ends because it's good versus evil, and good has to win. But when evil kind of had a reason to be there and show up and be evil, well, in this new Game of Thrones, that can't really happen. So it's just kind of gone when she returns. And she ends up right where they needed her to be for everything else that happens to her in the series. And I hope the books don't do this. I say hope like I have to, but I'm certain they won't go that route. I want so badly for the books to round out strong or round out at all at this point. And I keep seeing a lot of blame on the creators for making the show so bad, and obviously rightfully so. They're the ones who signed off on everything. But you have to ask yourself, if season 6 and part of 7 were good, as popular opinion seems to stand, how could things have been satisfying in the end? All of the character arcs completely stopped developing, rising or falling, by the end of season 5, beginning of season 6. I got to thinking about this because a lot of people have said Cersei and Jaime's finale was weak, and it was, but I honestly don't know how it could have been better at that point. After season 5, I could have told you a good ending for their love plot line, but they changed a lot in the next couple seasons, and they stagnated, and it just kind of fizzled out. That's it in a nutshell. Game of Thrones stopped being good when its characters stopped developing. Cersei, Daenerys, Jon never developed, but I mean, he learned stuff. And they stopped developing because fans wanted more of the same. They wanted more of that reputation that drew them to the show in the first place. And the showrunners just copied and pasted situations into later seasonings, just kind of shuffling around where characters were at the time. The show stopped being good when fans got what they wanted. And we were too encapsulated in these new developments that we didn't stop to say, nothing is really happening with these characters. I still love the first 6 seasons of Game of Thrones. Even part of season 7 is pretty good. But you can really start to see it collapsing in season 6. The ending was almost inevitable at that point. A lot of people have said that they wanted it to go longer. They wanted things to extend. They needed more explanation, a little slower process to the plot, but I don't think that would have helped it at all. That would have just prolonged where we ended up anyway. All right, I'm starting to sweat, and that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I'm looking forward to Winds of Winter. Hopefully it's released. That was the end of that thought. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Just a quick preview into what I'm doing next. I'm finishing up Knife of Dreams right now. And then I'll be talking about that in the next video. I have a review for an old book that I hated so much I want to talk about it more. I kind of want to do a commentary video on a movie we watched a couple days ago. It was just so bad that I want to share with the world, and I kind of want to get more into some funny, unscripted stuff. I don't really like reading from a script the whole time. This just isn't me. I'm trying to make it a little looser, trying to make it a little more natural, and it's been kind of hard. As for book reviews and current things and what I'm reading right now, it's been very, very hard to read this last week, honestly. It's just been a bit of a struggle with everything that's going on in the world right now, and being trapped inside all the time is hard enough, and I was able to kind of be productive, but with the protests and things that are happening right now, even though I'm not able to be super active in those situations with the protests. I just like to stay updated on it and understand what's going on right now. I don't really think that I should separate my own views from this channel, considering this channel it's just me. I'm writing, performing, and producing all of this content, so I figure why not? It's not a brand or anything, so I can say I do stand with the protesters. I won't get too deep into what I believe as far as things go, but Black Lives Matter. If that's controversial to you, then please don't subscribe to me, and please don't ever come back to this channel again. I'm going to try to go to more protests and things like that, but I don't want to talk too much about it because my voice, I have a white voice, and that's not really what we need to be listening to right now. So I will end this with one of my favorite Black authors, just a plug for him. I really enjoyed Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. If you haven't read it, definitely check it out. If you like high fantasy like Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, it's a great, great successor to that, and it's more based in traditional African folklore, written by a Black author, and Evan Winter is a fantastic writer. I read that book in about 5 days and enjoyed every single second of it. It's gorgeous. Definitely check that out. Get out to the protests, do what you can. I will try to keep producing content. Like I said, it's really hard to stay motivated right now. I'm sure a lot of other people feel that exact same way. But thank you for coming by. Please subscribe to my channel. I love you all. Take care.